The population of life on Earth had been reduced to a fraction of what it once was. Each small ecosystem existed like an island, separated by distance, climate, and circumstance. But as the skies cleared and warmth returned, the boundaries began to dissolve. Seeds traveled on wind currents across continents. Rivers carried nutrients into the seas. Animals migrated into new territories. The empty world began to fill again. The first true forests of the New Age were not like those of the Cretaceous. The old families of trees, the great conifers, the cycads, the towering seed ferns were fewer now. In their place grew flowering plants, angioperms quick to spread, quick to evolve. Their seeds traveled easily, carried by wind, water, and animals. Their flowers invited insects, and their fruits fed the new mammals and birds that had survived the dark. These plants shaped the world that followed, turning bare ground into lush ecosystems within a few million years. The early mammals, freed from the domination of the dinosaurs, adapted swiftly to their new opportunities. Some species grew larger, no longer confined to burrows and shadows. Others diversified into forms that could climb, swim, or glide. Fossils show how rapidly they evolved, their bones changing shape, their teeth adapting to new diets, their bodies adjusting to different climates. In just a short geological span, they had spread across every continent. They were no longer survivors. They were pioneers of a new order. Among them were the ancestors of modern species, small fur-covered creatures with sharp senses and quick movements. Their brains were proportionally larger than those of most reptiles, giving them an edge in memory and behavior. They lived in family groups, protecting their young, foraging together. Cooperation and care had become part of survival. The traits that would one day define mammals, intelligence, adaptability, emotional complexity, began as necessities in a world that required constant adjustment. The birds, too, expanded into the vacant skies. The large flying reptiles, the pterosaurs, were gone, leaving the air open for their smaller descendants. The surviving bird lineages filled every available niche. Some adapted for long-distance flight, others for diving, climbing, or scavenging. The skies, empty for a time, were soon alive again with movement. The sound of wings replaced the silence that had hung over the earth. The reptiles that endured, though fewer, continued their slow and steady existence. Crocodiles occupied rivers and swamps, just as they had before the impact. Turtles remained nearly unchanged, their forms already perfected for endurance. Lizards diversified into countless species, small and quick, filling the spaces between mammals and birds. Evolution did not favor size anymore. It favored flexibility. The age of giants had ended. The age of adaptability had begun. Insects, ever the quiet builders of worlds, flourished beyond measure. They pollinated the new plants, broke down organic matter, and recycled nutrients back into the soil. Their presence was invisible from afar, but essential to everything that grew. Ants formed complex colonies underground. Beetles fed on decaying wood. Butterflies and bees evolved alongside the flowering plants, creating the partnerships that would come to define much of Earth's later ecosystems. The hum of insect life became once again the background rhythm of the planet. The oceans, still recovering from the devastation, began to glow with life again. The plankton that had nearly disappeared during the impact winter returned, blooming in vast numbers across the surface waters. Their photosynthesis renewed the oxygen supply of the atmosphere. Small fish fed on them, followed by larger predators, and slowly the marine food chains were rebuilt. Coral reefs reappeared where the waters warmed, forming colonies that would one day rival those of the Cretaceous in beauty and diversity. The planet's blue expanses regained their color, their sparkle, their motion. As life expanded, so did the complexity of ecosystems. The early Paleogene period, the geological age that followed the Cretaceous, was a time of experimentation. Evolution was quickened by the empty world. There were no old hierarchies to maintain, no dominant species to suppress change. Every ecological niche was open, and life moved swiftly to fill it. Some species flourished briefly, then vanished. Others stabilized and spread, giving rise to new branches on the tree of life. It was a period of constant creation, each adaptation building upon another, forming the foundations of the modern world. The climate, while cooler than the greenhouse warmth of the Cretaceous, remained mild overall. The poles were largely ice-free, covered in forests of pine and birch. The equatorial regions were humid with vast wetlands and dense vegetation. The air was cleaner than it had been in millions of years. The fires were gone. The ash long since washed into the oceans. Rain fell regularly, nourishing the new growth. The Earth, though changed, had regained its balance. It's remarkable to think that such destruction led to such renewal. The asteroid that ended the dinosaurs also cleared the ecological stage, removing the barriers that had kept other life forms hidden. The same event that had darkened the skies also opened them. The mammals and birds that inherited the world did not just survive the catastrophe. They were shaped by it. Their very existence was molded by scarcity and resilience. The dawn after extinction was not only a return to light, but the beginning of innovation. Over the next few million years, the continents themselves continued to drift, slowly altering the shape of oceans and weather patterns. Mountain ranges formed, changing rainfall and temperature across vast regions. The shifting land created new habitats, dry plains, mountain valleys, and isolated islands where evolution worked independently. Diversity increased again. The planet was moving towards something new, something far more intricate than what had existed before. Each sunrise over that recovering world carried a sense of rebirth, though no creature was aware of it. The air was filled with the calls of birds, the rustling of leaves, the splash of water against stone. The silence that had once dominated the planet was gone. In its place came a steady murmur of life, the quiet, continuous noise of living things doing what they had always done, eating, growing, reproducing, dying. The earth had found its rhythm again. The plants continued to evolve alongside the animals. Flowering plants diversified into trees, shrubs, and vines, shaping the landscapes of the Paleogene. Forest became more structured with layered canopies and complex interactions among species. Roots stabilized the soil and decomposition renewed it. The planet's surface transformed from gray and barren to lush and living once again. Fossil pollen from this time shows a rapid increase in variety, evidence of ecosystems maturing within just a few thousand years after the end of the Cretaceous. The recovery of Earth was not uniform, but it was inevitable. Even in the harshest regions, life found a way to return. Volcanic plains became covered in mosses and lichens. Floodplains sprouted with reeds and grasses. Coastal swamps filled with amphibians and insects. The Earth, patient and indifferent, continued to create. The same forces that had built and destroyed the world countless times before were still at work, shaping the next chapter of its story. The dawn after extinction was, in truth, not a single moment. Bhutan era. It stretched across millions of years, each generation carrying the planet a little further from its old life. The dinosaurs were gone, but their influence remained in the birds that filled the air and in the fossils that rested beneath the soil. The world they'd ruled had not been erased. It had been transformed. Every new species, every returning plant, every breathing creature was part of the continuity that never truly ends. For the first time in its history, Earth was moving toward a balance that would allow for even greater complexity. The conditions that emerged from the chaos, the cooler climate, the rise of flowering plants, the diversification of mammals were the groundwork for all that would follow. From this quiet new beginning would come the forests, the grasslands, the oceans, and eventually the species capable of reflecting on the story itself. If you could have stood on one of those early Paleogene mornings, you would have seen a planet young again. The horizon would have been hazy with the warmth of a newly stable atmosphere. The air would smell of damp earth and vegetation. The calls of birds would echo across valleys, where once there had been silence. The rivers would sparkle under the sunlight, carrying silt rich with the remains of the old world, feeding the roots of the new. It would not be a paradise, not yet, but it would be a beginning. The dawn after extinction was not the triumph of life over death. It was the continuity of a process that has no end. Creation, destruction, and renewal, cycling endlessly through time. The Earth did not mourn its losses. It simply moved forward. The survivors, unaware of their role in history, went on living. Their small victories, a nest built, a seed sprouting, a new generation born, were the steps through which the planet healed. Over millions of years, the forest grew dense again. The oceans sparkled with life. The air became rich and breathable. The Earth was whole once more, though not the same as before. It never is. Each age carries traces of those that came before it, built upon layers of memory pressed into stone. The dawn after extinction was one of those rare moments when the planet began anew, rewriting its surface, reinventing its inhabitants, and reminding itself of its own resilience. And still, through all of it, the Earth's pulse continued deep beneath the crust, steady and eternal. The same pulse that had guided the formation of continents, the rise and fall of oceans, and the evolution of life. It had outlasted fire and ice, light and shadow, and it would continue long after the new forest had grown and fallen again. The dawn was only one in-on infinite series, each following a night that once seemed endless. The world had survived. The air shimmered with light again. The seas reflected the sun. The soil breathed life into roots and leaves. A silence had passed, replaced by the soft murmur of life returning to the planet. The Earth, older now but no less alive, carried on, its surface warm again under the same sun that had once watched its destruction. The world that emerged from the ashes of the Cretaceous was quieter, but it was not empty. It was different in rhythm, smaller in scale, and more intricate in its design. The age of giants had ended, yet their presence had not vanished. It lingered in the air, in the soil, in the DNA of the living things that followed. The echoes of those giants continued, woven into the biology of every creature that walked or flew or swam in the new world. The dinosaurs were gone, but their influence was not. The Earth still carried the memory of their footsteps everywhere. In subtle ways, their legacy was visible. The birds that filled the Paleogene skies were not merely descendants of dinosaurs. They were dinosaurs transformed by time. Their bones still carried the same hollow architecture that once lightened the bodies of flying predators. Their movements, their nesting behavior, their calls, even their feathers, all traced back to those ancient forms. When they spread their wings against the sunlight, they were continuing a story that had begun long before the extinction. The skies had changed, but the creatures that ruled them were carrying forward the same genetic thread. On the ground, mammals filled the spaces left by the fallen titans. Yet even they bore traces of what had come before. Evolution does not erase, it repurposes. The lungs, the circulatory systems, the metabolic engines that powered the new mammals were refined versions of mechanisms that had been tested for millions of years in the reptilian world. The flexibility that defined mammals, their ability to live in varied environments, to regulate temperature, to nurture their young had been, sculpted in part by the pressures left behind by the age of dinosaurs. The new rulers of the Earth were not replacements. They were continuations. As forests returned and climate stabilized, the Earth's surface began to look familiar again. The early Paleogene landscape was a mosaic of forests, rivers, wetlands, and coastlines. The vegetation was dense but shorter. The trees younger, the ecosystem still finding equilibrium. The animals that roamed through them were smaller, but their activity was constant. Insects hummed in the air. Small mammals rustled through the undergrowth. Birds sang from branches, their songs thin but insistent. The scale of life had shrunk, yet the complexity had multiplied. The bones of the giants buried beneath the soil began to turn to stone. Layer after layer of sediment covered them, silt, sand, ash, pressing the memory of that age into permanence. Over millions of years, these remains became fossils, silent records of lives that had once shaped the planet. Each fossil was a fragment of the Earth's memory, a line in the long story of time. The giants could no longer be seen, but their forms endured beneath the surface, waiting to be rediscovered. In rivers and deltas where water eroded rock, some of those bones became exposed again. Rain and wind uncovered shapes that had not seen light in 60 million years. Sometimes they broke apart. Sometimes they remained hidden for ages longer. But slowly, as continents shifted and climates changed, the remnants of the Cretaceous began to surface. The planet in its patient cycles revealed its own history piece by piece. To the creatures of the Paleogene, these bones meant nothing. They grazed beside them, nested above them, walked over them without recognition. The Earth had no need to remember consciously. It carried its past in its layers, its chemistry, its continuity of life. The echoes of the giants were not sounds or sights, but structures and processes. The way plants evolved to support large herbivores that were no longer there. The way predators adapted to the memory of prey, sizes that no longer existed. Even absence leaves an imprint. The planet had adapted to the scale of the dinosaurs, and in their absence, it was adjusting again. The oceans bore traces of that age, too. Coral reefs, once nearly destroyed, began to grow again over the limestone remains of older ecosystems. The shells of ammonites, the coiled mollusks that had ruled the seas for millions of years, were gone. But their design lived on in the shapes of other creatures. Nautiluses, squid, the intricate spirals that nature continued to favor. The patterns of evolution repeated themselves with variations, echoing what had worked before. Every new adaptation, every evolutionary experiment seemed to carry faint reminders of what had preceded it. In the skeletons of mammals, in the wings of birds, in the scales of reptiles, there were hints of forms that had vanished. Evolution was not a straight line, but a series of echoes. Each generation reshaping what had been left behind, refining and rediscovering it in new ways. The echoes of the giants were not only physical, they existed in the rhythms of the planet itself. The carbon and calcium of their bones became part of the rocks and oceans, feeding new chemical cycles. The forests that grew over their remains drew nutrients from their decomposing bodies, turning death into soil and soil into growth. Every living thing that rose afterward was, in a literal sense, built from the remains of what came before. The atoms that once made up a tyrannosaur might, millions of years later, have become part of a tree, a mammal, or a bird. The Earth reused everything. Nothing was lost, only transformed. As time passed, new giants appeared, though none quite like those that had come before. Some mammals grew massive, the ancestors of elephants, whales, and ground sloths. They filled ecological spaces that had been empty since the extinction. But the world that allowed them to exist was different. The air was cooler, the oxygen levels lower, the climate more variable. The balance that had sustained the dinosaurs no longer existed. These new titans were smaller, slower, and fewer. The age of planetary scale gigantism was over. The Earth had entered an age of moderation, yet the memory of scale persisted in nature's imagination. Evolution, though constrained by new conditions, continued to produce creatures of remarkable size and complexity. The whales, descending from small land mammals, returned to the sea and grew larger than even the greatest dinosaurs. The elephants filled the land with their slow, deliberate movements, shaping vegetation and soil in ways reminiscent of the sauropods. The pattern had changed, but the echo remained. Life still tested the limits of size, of endurance, of form. Millions of years later, the first primates appeared in the forests. Small, curious creatures with forward-facing eyes and agile hands. They lived in trees, feeding on fruit, navigating the complex architecture of branches and leaves. They had no awareness of the ancient world beneath them, no concept of the ages that had preceded their existence, but their presence, like everything else, was part of the same unbroken story. They too were descendants of survivors, shaped by the world that the giants had left behind. The echoes of the dinosaurs extended even into the planet's atmosphere. The oxygen they had helped regulate through their impact on vegetation and carbon cycles had altered the chemistry of the air. Their bones buried deep contributed to the slow formation of fossil fuels that would one day influence climates again. Their extinction had reshaped ecosystems so profoundly that the path of evolution itself had changed course. Every living thing that followed bore the invisible fingerprints of their presence and disappearance. To the Earth, this was simply another turn in an endless cycle. Species rose, dominated, vanished, and were replaced. The details changed, but the pattern did not. Each extinction created space for new life. Each resurgence carried traces of what had come before. The planet was not sentimental. It was procedural, following the rules of chemistry and physics, guided by the slow logic of natural selection. The giants had come and gone, but their energy remained part of the system. The continents continued to move, their shapes shifting slowly across the globe. Mountains rose and eroded. Oceans widened and narrowed. The air cooled, then warmed, then cooled again. Through it all, the echoes persisted, not as sounds, but as consequences. The ecosystems of the Paleogene and those that followed in the Neoene and Quaternary were living continuations of the Mesoic blueprint. The relationships between predator and prey, between plant and pollinator, between land and sea were all extensions of patterns first written in the time of the dinosaurs. When humans eventually appeared millions of years later, they too were shaped by those same forces. The structure of their bones, the organization of their lungs, the balance of their hormones, all inherited from lineages that had survived the long night after the Cretaceous. Even their curiosity, their tendency to explore, to observe, to remember, could be traced back to the same evolutionary pressures that rewarded awareness and adaptation. Humanity's rise was not separate from the dinosaurs' fall. It was one more echo in the same vast continuum. And when people began to dig into the ground, unearthing the fossilized bones of creatures they could scarcely imagine, the echoes became voices again. The stone skeletons spoke of a time when the world was ruled by beings so immense and strange that they seemed impossible. Their discovery connected two distant ages, the present and the ancient past, through curiosity and wonder. The giants, long gone, returned to the imagination of the species that would one day study them. Museums filled with their remains. Names were given: Tyrannosaurus, Triceratops, Brachiosaurus, and Kylosaurus. Their images appeared in art, in books, in the minds of children who could not yet comprehend timescales but understood awe. The echoes had traveled through stone and memory, becoming part of human culture. The giants had left more than bones. They had left stories, questions, and an enduring sense of scale. The Earth, of course, continued without pause. It did not know that one of its later species would remember the dinosaurs, reconstruct their lives, and find in them a reflection of itself. The planet kept turning. Seasons came and went. Species appeared and vanished. Volcanoes erupted. Ice ages arrived and receded. The same slow, indifferent processes that had once ended the dinosaurs now shaped everything that followed. But in the minds of those who studied the past, the echoes grew louder. The fossils were not just stones. They were reminders of continuity. In every feather that lifts on the wind, there is a trace of that ancient world. In every bird song at dawn, there is the faintest resonance of the Cretaceous forests. The warm blood of mammals carries within it the same biological ingenuity that once powered the bodies of the great reptiles. The ecosystems that surround us, the forests, the plains, the oceans, are all built upon foundations laid by those giants. Their extinction was not an ending, but a transformation. Their legacy was not silence, but complexity. Every movement of life since then has been a continuation of their world in miniature. A world still guided by the same forces, still pulsing with the same energy, still carrying the same persistence that allowed life to survive the worst of nights. The echoes of giants remain everywhere. In the rocks beneath our feet, in the air we breathe, in the lineage of every creature that moves today. They remind us that time does not erase, it reshapes. The world that was theirs became ours, not through conquest, but through inheritance. The Earth does not belong to one age or one kind of life. It simply holds whatever survives long enough to live upon it. And somewhere deep below the forests and mountains, beneath layers of stone and fossil, the bones of the giants still rest. Their weight is part of the planet now, their stories locked within its geology. Their echoes carried forward in the pulse of everything still alive. The Earth moves on, slow and eternal, carrying its memories quietly. A world still whispering with the presence of those who came before. The echoes never fade. They only change form. The world turns beneath the same stars that once watched the giants walk. The continents shaped and reshaped by time still carry their traces. The air that fills your lungs now once passed through the leaves of the Cretaceous forests. The calcium in your bones was born in the same oceans where the ammonites once floated. Every breath, every heartbeat, every sound of wind through trees is part of the same unbroken chain that began long before any eyes looked toward the sky and wondered. The Earth has seen endless beginnings and endings. It has burned, frozen, fractured, and healed. It has been covered in forests and ice, ruled by reptiles and birds, mammals and insects. And through it all, the same pulse is never stopped. The quiet rhythm that carries life forward, even through catastrophe. The story of the dinosaurs is only one verse in a song that has been playing for 4.5 billion years. Somewhere tonight, far from cities and light, the air still carries the same weight it did in the time of the giants. The night sky arches overhead, filled with ancient light. The glow of stars that outlived everything that ever walked this world. If you close your eyes and breathe slowly, you can almost feel it. The long memory of the planet, the deep continuity that runs through rock and air and living things alike. It isn't about extinction or even survival. It's about persistence, the quiet endurance of life in all its fragile and stubborn forms. The knowledge that even after the fire, after the dark, after the silence, something always returns. Something small, something unseen, something patient. The fern that grows in ash, the bird that sings after winter. The world never ends completely. It changes, waits, and begins again. The giants are gone, but their echoes remain all around you. In every leaf that unfurls, in every drop of water that falls back to the sea, in the hum of insects, in the shadows that move across the ground, in the warmth that rises with morning light, their world became ours. Their time became our time. The same sunlight that once touched their scales now touches your skin. The same gravity that carried their steps now carries yours. So when you breathe, you are breathing with them. When you sleep, you're resting in the same long cycle they once did, under the same stars, on the same ground, within the same unfolding story. The dinosaurs may have vanished from sight, but the planet that shaped them still turns slowly, steadily, endlessly. And as you listen now, the earth is still moving beneath you. The air is still shifting, quiet and patient. Somewhere in the dark, the sea is still breathing against the shore. Somewhere deep inside the planet, heat still flows from its core. Everything that was continues in different forms, in different rhythms. Nothing has truly disappeared. You can close your eyes now and let it all fade. The ancient forests, the seas, the shadows of titans walking through sunlight millions of years ago. Let the sound of their world dissolve into the quiet of this one. The earth has seen so much. And yet tonight, it is still here, turning as it always has, carrying everything it has ever been. Breathe with it. Slow, steady, the same rhythm as the planet beneath you. The same pulse that began before time had a name and will go on long after. The giants are gone. The world remains. And in its silence, they are still here. Not as fossils, not as memory, but as part of everything that is. Good night.